We start today's podcast, little NBA Tales from the Couch. We'll be sprinkling this in a little bit more. All right, we start with really a tale from Monday night's game, and that's Minnesota's win at the Clippers. We'll have John Krasinski on, obviously, later to go a little bit deeper into this, so a little bit of an overlap in some of the thoughts I have here that I'll ask him about. They've gotten LA twice now. When you go back and look at the season series, you have to double-check and be like, who was playing, who wasn't playing. Clippers, for the most part, were healthy in both these games. The length on the perimeter is a real thing. When you look at how McDaniels is assigned defensively to Kawhi, you've got Ant on Paul George. Alexander Walker's been a better defensive player. Like, if you're not going to have like perfect matchups throughout all of it, then you can put one of the tall guys if you want to on Harden. There's just a nice set of guys. And then on top of everything else, you just have length and bodies, and there's value to just being big at times. Because when the Clippers are rolling and they're getting their side-to-side action, and then all of a sudden it feels like the paint is just there for him, and Kawhi doesn't even need that much room because he's so much stronger and how well he's played this year. Kawhi gets that shoulder into you and then does the little step back, and it just goes in every single time. You could tell it was like, oh, wait, this is going to be a lot harder. So I thought that was incredible as far as that win, how dominant it was. And, that kind of happens throughout the course of the games. It's like, oh, wait, I thought everybody liked the Clippers. It's like, all right, well, they lost. They lost a game to what looks like a pretty good team here in Minnesota. So some of the things I was looking for, I actually watched Ty Lue's press conference after, because I thought, like, is this one of those matchups? Is this one of those matchups for as great as the Clippers have been, where it's like, man, if they actually have to play Minnesota earlier in the playoffs or in the Western Conference Finals, like, do you have to pick Minnesota in the matchup? So we know that the Clippers don't pass. They're last in the NBA in passes per game. They're 8 less passes per game than Dallas. Touches per game, they're last, which was a correlation of the passes anyway, which you'd expect. There's 370 touches per game by the Clippers. Sacramento, just a little comparison, number 1 in the NBA with 432. But in the 2 games specifically against Minnesota, Kawhi's 22-7-3, 47 and 50% shooting splits. We're talking from the floor overall in threes. But Paul George is 17-5-3, 29 and 29%. Again, small sample of just 2 games. Then you've got Harden at 16, 1.5 boards, 7 assists, 33 from the floor, 29% on threes. You also have the Westbrook part of this, his energy in this role, now that he's accepted it, now that he had to go to a million different teams in a very short amount of time. Some of this Lakers stuff with Westbrook that still gets brought up, at least out here, constantly on like, whose fault is it? Look, sometimes you have to get it kicked in a few times before you accept kind of where you're at. And if Westbrook had been more accepting of who he was at that point with the Lakers, maybe it all works out a little bit better. And maybe the LeBron stuff was really tough for him to deal with. And I could even be sympathetic to Westbrook on part of that. But you've seen through this run that Westbrook's energy has these moments, look, I'm never going to love his game, so we can just put that one to bed. But he'll have these moments where just the other team can't match his energy, even at a later stage of his career. Like, you can never question Westbrook for how hard he wants to try in a game. And the way they've filtered him in, where he's actually played with like the other really good players, I feels like a little bit more and more on some of the rotation patterns. But against Minnesota, what you're trying to do is find a way to have Gobert play against a small lineup, which we've seen be borderline disastrous in some playoff series. But yet what you have is then all of a sudden it's like, well, nobody's going to guard him. They're just not going to guard him. So now you have 5 defending 4, and they'll live with Westbrook, who's played 29 minutes a game in both games against Minnesota, who shot 32% overall from the floor. He's actually hit threes at a really nice clip at 43%. But if it's 3.5 attempts per game, Minnesota can live with that. So the question we have after these 2 games is like, wait, does Minnesota kind of kill that small lineup? The Clippers seem to go to it a lot. Look, they should go to it a lot. When you have the 3 guys with Norman Powell, or if you want to go with Coffey, and however you want to align Westbrook with the starters or only one of the other starters, like, the Clippers should definitely unveil that. But if that's one of their, hey, something's going wrong here. I've seen it with Phoenix. Hey, we don't really like how we are right now. You know what? Let's try to. They try to go to close small against Atlanta when they'd lost down there. We'll get to the Phoenix lineup against Sacramento here in a bit, but they went with KD at the 5. You'll see teams go to it, and then, of course, we crush it when it doesn't work. But I wonder if Minnesota's like, cool, go small, and go small with Westbrook, and you guys can do whatever you want, but we're not going to change. We're not going to be worried about it. And now on top of everything else, you're going to go small and everything's going to be clogged up because we're going to absolutely ignore Westbrook in the small lineups. So that might be something Ty Lue has to look at. The other side of the going small against Rudy Gobert teams has been that it's not necessarily what happens to him defensively with a smart point guard or just an unstoppable point guard and switch. And look, Rudy's had so many switches this year against small perimeter players where he holds up. And you're just like, God, that is so impressive and how much better he is this year defensively. But the problem was you weren't getting the benefit of him being big against your small lineup on the other side because you just didn't really trust him all that much with the ball. And I don't. I think he's one of the worst players in the league with the ball in his hands. But against the Clippers, it's not about post moves and dribble, drop step and all that stuff. It's, man, there's nobody here for me to worry about. You're not going to get a play run for him necessarily, but he's 16-14 in those two games. Ant is 28, 8-7, 53% shooting from the floor. He hasn't hit many threes, but Ant gets to the free throw line against the Clippers more than he does over the course of the season. 9 against the Clippers, 6.5, which feels kind of low for Ant. Look, and I also love that Minnesota brought it in the fourth quarter last night against Portland. It was kind of a weird game. It's kind of one of those schedule losses. You beat LA in LA back to back. You go up to Portland. You don't take them seriously. You know, you're still feeling yourself after beating the Clippers, which has been the best team in the NBA for 2 months. And then they put it on Portland in the fourth quarter, 37 points, and Ant goes for 41. And I'm telling you, they subbed him out right after. Like, he got down in a defensive stance up 19 with like 3+ minutes to go, where you would have thought the game was tied against Boston. You know what I mean? Like, you would have thought, okay, this possession means everything right now defensively. We need to stop. It's like, no, you don't. You're up 19. I love that from him. By the way, little love for Scoot, 14-9. He'd missed a week. Maybe some things slowing down for him a little bit. Felt a little bit better about him. Didn't love the Banton ISOs when it felt like Scoot was cooking a bit more. It kind of worked for him. He had 10 free throw attempts, but my God, can you imagine being like Anthony Simons going, "What? We brought this dude in who doesn't really play anywhere, and now he's going to initiate a ton of offensive possessions." Let's go to Phoenix. They outlast Sacramento last night. It was supposed to be, and it technically still is, Booker, Beal, and KD's 22nd game playing all together. But Beal played 5 minutes, left with a hamstring. He's out tonight. Everybody's optimistic. They're always optimistic in the beginning, a lot like relationships. Sacramento's up 87-85 in the third. Booker had an awful start to this game, 2 of 11 for 7 points when he stepped to the free throw line. Then he started to go off. Sabonis, the numbers are incredible. I mean, he just keeps stacking these ridiculous numbers. Third straight triple-double, 35, 18, and 12. Sacramento's killing Phoenix in the paint, getting deep at the rim whenever they want. And then Vogel had the Durant at the 5 Nurkic decision where later in the fourth quarter, like, he tried to ride it out without Nurkic for a while. Phoenix hits a 3-point barrage. That also had a weird stretch where Herter was getting yelled at by Mike Brown around 10 minutes left to go in the game because of being late on whatever defensively they wanted to do. I think it was just as simple as showing or staying with the screener. And I don't think he didn't even come back into the game. So anyway, Phoenix is hunting Herter first, then Monk, and then bringing Sabonis out and switches. Durant was definitely looking to do that more, which leads to the other side of the Sabonis coin. But then Sabonis on the other side is just destroying everybody. Just camped out at the rim, offensive rebounds off of misses, great assist, his pass, like his numbers. You almost feel guilty being like, yeah, he's pretty good. It's like, man, the numbers make this guy a Hall of Famer when you look at them all. Royce O'Neal coming over has a huge 3 late. Booker over the stretch of closing this game out after the slow start. He had 3 ISO mid-range pull-ups. I don't know what to do with Booker when he has it like that. He's one of my favorite players in the league. That ISO mid-range pull-up thing, when he gets to his spot, it's basically unstoppable. Then Durant throws in a few of those. So Phoenix is pulling away here late. Despite a weird turnover from Durant where he didn't pay any attention to what was happening behind him, Fox knocks it loose. They get a 3. Now it's a 1-point game when they were up on the possession and score. But ultimately, the O'Neal 3 was such a big shot. So basically, we're looking at like free throws, and they're trying to stop the clock and get guys to the line. Something happened last night that does not happen very often. Booker's fouled by Sabonis on an inbounds, and Sabonis Booker loses the basketball. So live, it's like, oh, wait a minute, was it even a foul? Or Booker turned it over? Like, let's challenge it. Sabonis looked at the bench and was shaking his head, going, don't challenge it. And as we saw in the replay, he clearly hacks Booker's arm. We don't see that very often, where the player is telling his own bench in a huge spot, he's like, don't even do it. Don't challenge it. They didn't. Offensive rebound on a missed free throw. And that's game. Phoenix has won 13-17. Now we have a Beal question again, who's missed basically half the season. Sacramento, 23-14 to start the year, 7-9 in their last 16 games. Phoenix is the 5 seed, but 4 behind Denver. And that's kind of where we're at right now with them. Let's talk about Boston and Brooklyn. They beat the Nets in Brooklyn last night, up 16 to start the fourth quarter. This game got to 111-105 with 2:49 left. Derek White hit basically like the biggest three after this big Nets run. Tatum had 31 at the half. He finished with 41. So the late Celtics stuff, I hear about it all the time. I'm borderline obsessed trying to figure out what it is or what it isn't. I know what my eyes tell me. Then I look at the numbers and I go, there's just not as much in there as you would think unless you want to talk about settling. So let's run over some stuff because we get a lot here. Fourth quarter net rating for Boston. It's third best in the NBA. It can be a little weird at times. Utah's second. You could also have blowouts where the other team comes back and then it screws up your net rating in the fourth quarter. But if that were the case, then they wouldn't have the third best in the NBA. The offense in the clutch for Boston, right? You're thinking, it probably dips down there a little bit. Don't love what I see all the time. They have the fourth best clutch offense in the NBA. Okay, there's too many isolations. Is it that? Whoa, wait. They have the fourth most isolations run over the course of a game. I don't know that I always love the isolation tracking number based on the totals, but this number exists for all 30 teams. So how does Boston match up? Fourth most. Are they efficient on those? Well, they're seventh in points per possession on the ISOs. What about drives? This is something else I've looked at. Do they settle a little bit too much? Maybe we have something here finally. They're 27th in drives per game, and they're 20th on free throw attempts per game for a team, right, in the NBA. So are we getting closer to trying to figure something out? Let's look at the shot charts. 40% of their shots are threes. It's the most in the league, but they're seventh in three-point percentage. In the fourth quarter, 47% of their shots in the fourth quarter are threes, right? That's number one in the league. It dips down to 10th, but it's not necessarily disastrous from 3 points. So now when I start looking at it, I go, well, let's look at their free throw frequency. Let's look at the free throw rate on some of this stuff. If you just go pick and roll ball handler, ball ends up with the ball handler. They have the third worst free throw frequency of any team. You're going to be running a lot of high or just any pick and roll in the NBA. You're going to be running a lot of that, especially with guys like Tatum and everybody that can initiate kind of their own offense, keep the ball. Wait, they're not getting to the free throw line very much. Does that mean they're just taking a lot of threes off of that? There could be the correlation to that. So when I started looking at threes, they have the most shots from 25 to 29 feet and the fourth fewest shots at the rim. So that's why we have less free throws. But here's what I thought was maybe the most informative part of trying to figure this all out. Like, are they not taking enough free throws in games overall or late in games? And that's what's leading to just something we don't like, feeling like they're not aggressive enough, feeling like they're settling. How about this number? If you look at isolation possessions in the NBA, top 5 players, it's Luka, Embiid, Tatum, SGA, and Ant. All right. Ranging from Luka having 7.3 isolations. Again, this just ends up being like a purest definition of isolation, not necessarily like, clearly Luka has more than 7 possessions a game. But by this standard, Luka's first. His free throw frequency is 18.5%. Embiid's is 17.6. SGA's at 21. Ant, who everybody thinks doesn't get any calls, is at 13.5. Tatum is last at 11.7. So he's third in these isolation possessions in the NBA per player, and he's not even close to these other guys in free throw frequency. So I guess what I'm saying here is that we just need him to flop more. he needs to cheat the game a little bit more, because we start baking all these numbers together and you're like, yep, and they're still winning 75% of the games. So it may be these moments, some lingering playoff stuff that isn't accurate, but there aren't these staggering numbers. Yet they settle for a few too many threes, which leads to not getting enough free throws, and that's fine. But if you look at this number in comparison to their number one option all the time, he just doesn't get to the free throw line enough. And maybe that's part of a solution to what is still kind of a minor problem on the scale of problems for teams in the league this year. We close with Oklahoma City's win at Orlando. Shaq on the call with Stan Van Gundy, which is kind of funny if you think about the history there. But it's cool. Older guys end up working out everything. Here's the point. Younger teams, both teams looking ahead to the future. Oklahoma City, obviously better this year, a little bit more of a sense of who they are. So it's still early for the Magic, but it's 127-113. SGA had 8 points at the half and only 2 free throw attempts for, like, he was 3 of 11. So you're like, man, they're down, and that's what's happening with SGA. But Jalen Williams, he had 33 over the course of the game, stepped up when SGA struggled. By the way, SGA was fine. He ended up with an absurd final tally on this one because he went off in the second half. So really this kind of comes down to something that's really, really easy to look at. It's just the three-point shooting. Like, Oklahoma City shot it better from 3. They were 41%. Orlando was 31%. Orlando's 29th in the league, three-point percentage. It's a massive problem for a team that I think a lot of us really enjoy watching because of the players on it. And there's another part with Oklahoma City that I just love. I love what their staff, I love what they represent, which is so rare for a young team. And that's just kind of understanding how to get open looks. And SGA's the anchor of it because you're worried about him in this mini Giannis wall defensive thing that you have to deal with how good he is on his drives and how good he is at getting the free throw line. And on top of everything else, he can shoot. But if you watch them on drives, the off-ball offensive players are really good at moving around and just resetting their positioning. And it's my favorite thing. It's the easiest thing to do at every level of basketball. Everybody should be doing it. Just because somebody else has the ball and they're driving doesn't mean that now the position is over for you. And I actually think it's a great habit to get into. And it also is going to lead to open shots in the playoffs. Instead of some of these teams that still even in playoff games, like, oh, I don't have the ball. I'm just a stretch 3 now. And I'm going to stand here in the corner and never, ever just reset left or right 10 feet. Make the defensive player have to move a little bit. Maybe you're bringing him further away from a potential offensive rebound chance. And Oklahoma City, for a young team, watch them. They do this really well.